Hi, everybody. It's Peter Schiff. It's Thursday, February 14th, 2013. Today is Valentine's Day, although it felt like Valentine's Day 2 days ago when President Obama was delivering his State of the Union address, because really what it amounted to is a Valentine's Day gift to the nation where the president tries to buy our affections or our votes by promising more free stuff, something for nothing, by promising that more government can solve our economic problems. You know, the president described the State of the Union as strong. Of course, all presidents, when they make that annual pilgrimage up to the Capitol, they always tell us that the Union is sound, that the Union is strong. That's what George Bush said in 2007, just before the financial crisis, the economic meltdown. They always tell us how great it is, even though we're on the edge of a precipice. The fact of the matter is, the Union is anything but strong. It's a complete disaster. We are staring at an economic crisis much graver than the financial crisis of 2008. Yet what does President Obama have to say? Basically, nothing. Everything is fine. All we need is a little more government. We need more government programs, more government spending. Just about everything that the president promised involved more government. He proposed this, he proposed that, and he went on about how it's his job, the government's job, to strengthen the middle class, that America's prosperity is a result of a strong middle class, and the middle class is struggling, therefore the government needs to strengthen it, and then if we spend more money on programs aimed at the middle class, then we'll have a more vibrant economy. The problem is the president has the economic cart before the horse. He thinks America's economy is strong because we have a strong middle class. It's actually the reverse. It's because our economy is strong, or was strong, that we had a vibrant, healthy middle class. The middle class didn't make America strong. A strong American economy created the middle class. The middle class was a consequence, a byproduct of that economic strength. But where did the strength come from? It didn't come from consumers buying stuff. It came from producers making stuff. It came from the entrepreneur, from their creativity, their ingenuity, their perseverance, their hard work, their sacrifice. That's where the middle class came from. What defined middle class was wages that allowed people to afford a standard of living that prior to that point, most people could only dream about. The American middle class was born from the productivity that resulted from limited government. Because we were freer than everybody else, we had less government, lower taxes, we were able to increase labor productivity. We were able to raise the real value of wages so that individuals could have a job and live the American dream, the middle class lifestyle. It wasn't because we had a middle class that we became strong. It was because we were strong that we were able to create a middle class. But to do that, you need limited government, you need freedom, you need capitalism, entrepreneurship, laissez-faire, sound money, the exact opposite of what the president spent the other evening promising to deliver. In fact, more government isn't going to help the middle class. It's going to hinder the middle class. It's going to help destroy the middle class. It's going to send more middle class Americans into poverty. They'll be lower class as a result of all the things the president wants to do. Instead of coming up with a litany of new things for the government to do, what he should have been proposing was to undo all the prior government interventions. He should have been listing all the agencies and departments that he was going to eliminate so that we wouldn't have to pay for them anymore because we can't afford it. We need real economic growth, not more government, and what's standing in the way of our economy and prosperity is the government. And if he wants a more prosperous, if Obama wants a more prosperous economy, he's got to remove those barriers, not increase them, not make them bigger, which is exactly what he proposed. One of the things that the president proposed was these manufacturing hubs that he wants to create. Apparently, he's created one in partnership with, was it General Electric or I can't even remember which company, but it was a partnership between a corporation, maybe it was IBM, and the Department of Energy or the Department of Defense, and apparently he thinks it's been a great success. And now President Obama wants to revive our manufacturing by having more of these, manufacturing hubs around the nation. Manufacturing hubs, at one point, the whole nation was one giant manufacturing hub, and the government had absolutely nothing to do with it. We didn't have any manufacturing hubs during the Industrial Revolution. America became the leader in global manufacturing without any help from the government. In fact, it was because the government stayed out that we were able to manufacture as much as we did, that we were as competitive and productive as we were. The real solution to reviving our manufacturing is not more government involvement, not more government programs, but for the government to get out of the way. You know, Ronald Reagan, in one of his State of the Union addresses, said that government wasn't the answer to our problems, that government is the problem, and it is. And President Obama is threatening to make that problem a lot bigger. One way the president threatened to increase the burden that government places on the economy, particularly on the unemployed, is by threatening to raise the minimum wage up to $9 an hour. Think about it. We've got millions and millions of Americans that are already unemployed. The president wants to make sure that they don't get jobs. The government wants to make sure that if you don't have any skills and you try to get your first job, that it's that much more difficult. The government wants to take the bottom rung of the economic ladder and raise it even higher so that fewer people can reach up and grab it. That's what the minimum wage does. The president says that this is going to be great if we increase the minimum wage, because according to the president, it means that workers will have more money to spend. Well, if you lose your job because you're not worth the minimum wage, then you have no money to spend. But even those minimum wage workers that end up with a raise, where is the money coming from? Somebody has to pay those higher salaries. So it's not a net gain. There's no more money to be spent. What happens is the employers of these minimum wage workers either have to have a reduced profit for themselves, or they have to raise the prices that they charge their customers. So one way or another, you're simply transferring purchasing power. You're not creating it. But of course, what you are creating is more unemployment. So you're making the economy less productive, and that impacts everybody because now you're taking more people and making them permanently unemployed. What we really should be doing is abolishing the minimum wage, not increasing it. Why would you want to make hiring people more expensive when you have so many people who are unemployed? The way that you reduce the demand for something is by making it more expensive. And by making it more expensive to hire people, fewer people will be hired. And of course, the minimum wage is not just the $9 an hour. It's the payroll taxes that are on top of that. It's workman's comp. It's the litigation expense. It's health care that might be required. In fact, everything the government is doing is destroying job opportunities, not creating them. In fact, a lot of companies are already reducing their full-time employees to part-time in order to survive the mandates from Obamacare. Similar to the way the president can't connect the dots with the minimum wage, he also makes the same mistake in false logic when it comes to mortgage refinances. One of the president's other suggestions, or one of his proposals, is to make it easier for people who are underwater in their mortgages to refinance at today's artificially low mortgage rates. And according to the president, this will put an extra $3,000 a year in the hands of homeowners. And he says, who could oppose that? This is great for the country because that's $3,000 more dollars that a family can spend. Well, where is that money coming from? Again, it's coming from the lender who has to take a $3,000 a year reduction in the income that is generated on that mortgage. So who is the lender? It's a bank, it's a pension fund, it's an insurance company. So what does that mean? That means that companies have to make bigger contributions to their pensions. It means insurance companies have to raise the premiums they charge the people who are insured. It means that the banks themselves are less financially viable because their assets have now been reduced in value. Now, of course, we don't see the real ramifications of this until interest rates move up. But once interest rates move up and now the banks are failing because they own all these low-yielding mortgages, who is supposed to pay to bail them out? Well, the very homeowners who got the benefit of the lower mortgage. So what the government giveth, the government ultimately taketh away. Of course, the way they're going to take it away is going to be with a debased dollar. They're going to have to print a lot of money to bail out all these financial institutions. They're probably not going to raise taxes because that's not politically popular. But creating inflation and then denying it exists, well, that's the game all the politicians seem to be playing, and we play it better than most. So that's what's going to happen. One interesting observation the president did make was with respect to energy. He pointed out that energy imports are at a multi-year low. I don't remember if he said 10 years or 15 years, but he pointed that out, and it's true. But it's not for the reasons that the president suggests. He seemed to say that it's because we're riding around in these fuel-efficient cars and because we're producing so much oil and gas ourselves. The real reason is that we're using a lot less oil. Energy consumption or gasoline consumption in America is at a 16-year low in 2012. A 16-year low. Now, if the economy were really getting better, as the president suggests, why aren't we using more gasoline? See, the fact of the matter is the economy is contracting. People aren't driving because they don't have any jobs to drive to. When you're unemployed, you don't need to use as much gas because you don't have to go back and forth to work. That's the fact. But gasoline prices are rising anyway. If you look at the trade figures that came out last week, our trade deficit contracted mainly because we exported so much gasoline because we didn't even need it. Our economy is so weak that we exported all the gasoline that Americans are too poor to use, or they don't need it because they're not working. And if you look at the premium, Brent is now trading at what, $22 over West Texas? I've never seen it that high. This is, anecdotal evidence of the underlying weakness in the U.S. economy, that we're using so little energy, but we're still paying more for it. And that trend is going to continue. Americans are going to keep using less of everything, but paying more for what they do use, because even though demand is coming down, supply is going to be coming down, because we're going to have to export a lot more to individuals that have more earnings, whose currencies might be appreciating against the U.S. dollar. The president also talked about the sequester. If you remember, those were the automatic spending cuts that were supposed to kick in January, that were agreed upon as part of the compromise that was necessary to raise the debt ceiling back in 2011. Now, the president in his State of the Union address said the sequester was a bad idea. He called the cuts harsh, arbitrary. He said that they would devastate his priorities, they would jeopardize our military readiness, that they would cause hundreds of thousands of job losses, jeopardize the recovery. He said that Congress passed this law, and now he wants Congress to do something to stop this terrible law that they passed. Well, first of all, Congress didn't pass a law. Congress passed a bill. The reason it's a law is because the president signed it into law. It didn't become a law over his veto. If President Obama thought that it was such a bad idea, why didn't he veto it when he had a chance? Why did he sign it? In fact, not only did the president sign it, he bragged about having signed it. In fact, for months after signing that bill, he was on television stating that if any Republicans tried to get around these automatic spending cuts, if they came to him and tried to find a way to prevent them from happening, that he was going to stand firm, that there was no way these cuts wouldn't take place. Well, that was then, and this is now. The president said that well before the election and well before these cuts were scheduled to kick in. He knew then that he was lying. that as soon as it became time to actually make the cuts, it wouldn't be Congress that was trying to get around him. It was Obama himself that tried to get around. The only roadblock we have is Congress. The Republicans in Congress have to stand firm and resist the pressure from the president to cancel these cuts, because allowing the cuts to take place is much better than preventing them from taking place. Now, of course, I use the word cuts, but nothing is actually being cut. That's the problem. These are reductions in the rate of increase. Now, that's the most we're going to get, so let's hope that we get it. But the only real problem with the sequester is that the cuts aren't big enough. We need much deeper cuts. And contrary to what the president says, cutting government spending doesn't hurt the economy. Cutting government spending helps the economy. It's government spending that is in the way of economic growth. It stands in the way of prosperity. And if we want the economy to grow, if we want rising living standards, if we want to create productive jobs for American citizens, the only way we're going to achieve that is to make draconian cuts in government spending. Not just the tiny, inconsequential, trivial cuts that make up the sequester, but real, deep, meaningful cuts. The big problem is, as trivial as these cuts are, even those cuts are too big for the real President Obama. Now that the president has been reelected, he could be a little bit more honest with the American public. He can lay his cards on the table. He doesn't have to maintain the pretense that he actually wants to reduce the deficit, that he's going to cut government spending. Hopefully, now that the Republicans can plainly see those cards, that they don't throw away their winning hand. Because unlike the negotiations over the expiration of the Bush tax cuts, the default option is that the sequester goes through. So all the Republicans have to do is stand firm, and those so-called cuts are going to take place. Now, it's not enough to actually do the job, but at least it's a start. But if those spending cuts are rejected, if the Republicans cave, then it will be obvious to the world that it's all talk. When it comes to deficit reduction, nobody in Washington is willing to do it. They're willing to talk about it. They're willing to promise cuts in the future, knowing that those cuts will never take place. The only thing that's going to force Congress and the president is an economic crisis, a currency crisis, and a sovereign debt crisis. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on your perspective, a crisis is coming soon. What President Obama really should have been discussing in his State of the Union address, he should have been leveling with the American people about how precarious the state of our union actually is, how the government has brought us to bankruptcy, and how we have to change, how there's going to have to be some sacrifices, that many people were promised something that we can't deliver. And they're going to have to get used to that. We're going to have to roll up our sleeves and go back to work. Instead, all we get from President Obama is more platitudes, more empty promises, campaign rhetoric, sound bites. The rich need to pay their fair share. Government needs to spend more, invest more. We don't want the government investing money. The government is incapable of making an investment. In order to make an investment, you need to be guided, motivated by the desire to make a profit. You've got to be worried about making a loss. The government doesn't make profits, and it doesn't care about losses because the taxpayers are stuck with those. When the government invests money, it's done for a political reason. And the profits don't go to the taxpayer. They go to the people who have political connections, who get to feed at the public trough. The only thing the government can do is spend money. Of course, the government likes to couch spending using language, using the terms of investment, because it doesn't have as negative a connotation. But that's all the government does is spend. It can't invest, it can only spend, and it doesn't spend wisely. It overspends. It's extravagant by its very nature. That's how governments work. Nobody spends other people's money frugally. That's why we have to limit government spending. Government needs to spend as little as possible. Everybody in Washington now wants to deny that we have a spending problem. Of course, what do the alcoholics do? They deny they have an alcohol problem right up until the very end. They can't deal with the problem until they hit rock bottom and finally acknowledge that the problem exists. Well, maybe the British are about to hit rock bottom, and we're not too far behind them. The big problem is we're a much bigger alcoholic. We have a much bigger drug problem than the British. Their problem, should they decide to deal with it, is probably going to be an easier task, not to minimize the difficulty that the British are going to face if they do the right thing. It's simply to show how incredibly difficult it's going to be for America to do the right thing, given the fact that we've created a problem that is much larger as a result of the fact that we've had this reserve currency and we've been able to get away with this for so long. It'll be interesting to listen to President Obama's State of the Union address in 2014. Whether or not the economic collapse that I'm forecasting has happened before then still remains to be seen. But I know one thing for sure, we'll be a year closer to it if it hasn't happened. And if it hasn't happened by 2014, it will probably be just around the corner. That's it for now. Take care, everybody, and happy Valentine's Day.